Really looks like a full X, right? It completely flipped from where he was January versus where he is right now in terms of his approval versus disapproval. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, Brittany, you're exactly right. It has completely flipped since January. You look at his approval now, and it is 41% approve, 50% disapprove. So this is his worst approval rating yet in our polling. Among independents, he is 45% approve, 55% disapprove. These are not very good numbers for President Trump. We see a little bit further on in the poll as we test some of his policy areas that he's not receiving high marks for these policies. This is not a great end to 2025 for President Trump and the administration.
I'm curious, obviously some people are moving from approving President Trump at the beginning of 2025, closing out the year, to disapprove.
This is what happens when the facade cracks and the mythology crumbles, because what we are witnessing in these numbers emerging from the polling data right now in December 2025 is nothing short of a spectacular collapse of the entire edifice upon which Trumpism has been constructed, reconstructed and reconstructed again, since that escalator ride almost a decade ago. And this is the moment that historians will return to when they write about the inflection point, where the spell was finally broken, where reality reasserted itself against the authoritarian gaslighting machine that has terrorized this democracy for nearly 10 years now, because the final Emerson College Polling National Survey of 2025 finds President Trump with a 41% job approval rating and 50% job disapproval. And you need to understand what this number means in its totality, what it represents as an epistemological rupture in the collective consciousness of a nation that was promised economic prosperity, and was handed instead the bitter fruits of economic incompetence, wrapped in tariffs and deportation programs and tax cuts for billionaires, while working families drown in grocery costs that refuse to come down. But here is the bombshell that should make every progressive heart beat faster with anticipation, because President Trump's approval rating on his longtime political calling card, the economy, has sunk to 31%, the lowest it has been across both of his terms as president, according to a new survey from the Associated Press NORC, and this is genuinely historic, because Trump rode the economy to victory in 2024 on the promise that he alone could fix the affordability crisis that Biden had supposedly created, and now the American people in their lived experience in their grocery stores and their gas stations, in their attempts to afford holiday gifts, are seeing through the lies and rejecting the propaganda that Fox News beams into their living rooms 24 hours a day. Just 36% of Americans approve of his handling of the economy, according to the latest NPR/PBS News Marist poll, and his overall job approval rating stands at a meager 38%, which represents the lowest of his second term and the lowest number he's seen in Marist surveys since April 2018. And do you remember what happened after April 2018, when his numbers looked like this? Because Republicans lost 40 seats in the House that year. And we are staring down the barrel of a similar reckoning in 2026. If we organize, if we mobilize, if we turn this moral outrage into political action. The even more delicious irony, the detail that should make every policy wonk salivate, is that 68% of voters, including 44% of Republicans, say the economy is in poor shape, and this means that Trump cannot even convince his own voters that his economic policies are working, which means the entire ideological infrastructure of supply-side economics and deregulation and trickle-down mythology is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions, because people can see their bank accounts and they can see the price tags at Walmart, and no amount of performative masculinity or racist scapegoating of immigrants can change the material reality of American families struggling to make ends meet. About half of Americans say it's harder than usual to afford holiday gifts this year, and about half say they are cutting back on non-essential purchases more than they usually would, and this is the human cost of MAGA economics. This is what happens when you prioritize culture war grievance politics over actual economic policy that improves people's lives. And now brace yourself for the next revelation, because this is where it gets truly fascinating from a coalition analysis perspective, because just 30% of independents and 8% of Democrats approve of the job Trump's doing, which means he has completely lost the middle, the persuadable voters, the swing constituencies that delivered him the White House, and overall, 6 in 10 have a negative opinion, including about 9 in 10 Democrats and 7 in 10 independent, disapproving of his performance, and this is catastrophic for Republican congressional candidates who need those independent voters to survive competitive races. The erosion is happening in real time. Approval of Trump's handling of the economy and immigration are down about 10 points since March, which means this is not statistical noise, this is not margin of error fluctuation, This is a genuine sustained collapse in public confidence that reflects the reality of policy failures, from tariffs that are crushing American businesses, to deportation programs that are tearing apart communities, to healthcare sabotage that is leaving people without coverage. But wait, because here comes perhaps the most significant finding, the one that should send shockwaves through Republican strategy meetings and MAGA war rooms across the country. Because the base itself is fracturing and the share of people who strongly approve of Trump has dropped from 26% in April to 21%. Now, while slightly more people now say they strongly disapprove of Trump at 44% compared with 42% in April, and two groups show the largest drop in strong support for the president since April, those who identify as Republican, and in particular those who identify with Trump's MAGA movement. This is the structural weakness that no amount of rallies or truth social rants can paper over, because the proportion of self-identified Republicans who identify with MAGA has dropped by 7 percentage points since April 2025. Among the Republicans who consider themselves more supporters of the Republican Party than the MAGA movement, the share of those who strongly approve of Trump now stands at 35% compared to 38% in April, while Trump's strong approval is higher among those who consider themselves MAGA Republicans at 70%. But that represents a drop of 8 points from 78% since April. Now let us situate this within the broader historical and theoretical framework of authoritarian collapse, because what we are observing is not merely a polling fluctuation, but rather a crisis of legitimacy that exposes the fundamental hollowness of the populist right's claim to represent the material interests of working people, and this recalls the work of political scientist Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who has documented how authoritarian leaders maintain power through a combination of propaganda spectacle and the delivery of tangible economic benefits to their coalition, and when that economic delivery mechanism breaks down, when the material conditions deteriorate, the entire edifice becomes vulnerable to rapid delegitimization. Trump figures to close the year with a steady erosion in his poll numbers, many of which are now at the lowest point in either of his terms, and voters are steadily losing confidence in what the Trump White House is selling, because the con has been exposed, because reality cannot be denied forever. The independent voter collapse deserves special attention, because these are not partisan Democrats, these are not committed progressives, these are the persuadable middle who gave Trump a chance in 2024, because they were frustrated with Biden-era inflation, and now 49% of people who live in rural areas disapprove of the job he's doing on the economy, while just 43% approve, and 48% of white women without college degrees disapprove, versus 41% who approve, while in the suburbs more disapprove by a 60%-33% margin. And these are core Trump constituencies, or at least they were supposed to be core Trump constituencies, but the economic populist message has been revealed as fraudulent because his actual policies benefit Mar-a-Lago plutocrats, not working families in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Michigan. President Donald Trump's job approval rating has fallen 5 percentage points to 36%, the lowest of his second term, while disapproval has risen to 60%, according to Gallup, and Republicans' approval has fallen 7 points to 84%, while independence has slipped 8 points to 25%, with Republicans rating the lowest of Trump's second term, while independence is the worst in either term. Here is where progressive analysis must go deeper than surface-level schadenfreude, because what these numbers reveal is the structural contradiction at the heart of neoliberal authoritarianism, the impossibility of maintaining a cross-class coalition when your economic policies systematically redistribute wealth upward while your rhetoric promises to fight for the forgotten man. Only 22% of Trump's own 2024 voters say tariffs are helping the U.S. economy now and will continue to be a benefit, and among self-described MAGA Republicans, only 27% said tariffs are boosting the economy now and in the long run, while 21% said tariffs are damaging in both the short and long term, which means Trump cannot even sell his signature economic policy to his own most committed supporters. The emperor has no clothes, and the MAGA faithful are starting to notice, and the political ramifications are already becoming visible because only 15% of independents, 19% of young adults, and 29% of Hispanics say that they will vote for Republican candidates in 2026. The average swing toward Democrats in special elections conducted since Trump's second term began has been substantially higher than 8 points, in fact, well into double digits, which means we are watching in real time the construction of a Democratic wave election that could fundamentally reshape American politics if we capitalize on this moment. It was a bloodbath and a disastrous night for Republicans in the state, according to a longtime New Jersey GOP strategist who said it shows there's some discontent, certainly with the current administration, in the November 2025 elections, and this pattern of Democratic overperformance is consistent across competitive jurisdictions. The economic data underlying these approval numbers tells the story of betrayal and incompetence, because by far the biggest financial factor straining Americans is prices, with 45% of respondents saying prices are their top economic concern, while nothing else came close, with housing second at 18%, followed by tariffs at 15% and job security at 10%, and Trump promised to bring down prices, but instead, 30% in this survey said the area where they live is not very affordable or not affordable at all for the average family, which is up from 45%. When Marist asked the same question in June, a whopping increase and a sign of how much people are feeling the economic pinch. This is not abstract macroeconomic theory. This is people's lived reality, their inability to afford rent or groceries or health care, and they are correctly identifying Trump's policies as making the situation worse, not better. Now we must connect this electoral and economic analysis to the broader crisis of democratic legitimacy, because the day seemed to reinforce the emerging limits of Trump's ability to force others to bow to him, as his poll numbers drop and he trends towards lame duck status, and we saw this when a majority of Indiana Republican state senators actually voted against Trump's position on congressional redistricting, despite facing primary threats, which demonstrates that elected Republicans are starting to calculate that Trump may not be politically invincible heading into 2026. There are signs that Trump's dominance over Congress is ebbing, a trend that will continue as midterms approach and members' political fortunes are increasingly at risk while second-term presidents accomplish most of what they can hope to do in the first 18 months. And we are past that window, which means Trump's legislative agenda is essentially dead, and he will spend the next 3 years watching his political capital evaporate. The intellectual dishonesty of the conservative response to these numbers would be comical if it were not so dangerous, because Trump gave a primetime address this week and Donald Trump conjured a hellscape of a dead nation. He claims he was handed by former President Joe Biden, saying he inherited a mess and is fixing it, while Americans hoping for recognition and empathy about their struggles with high prices instead got a dressing down for not recognizing that they are basking in a glorious new golden age of his making. And this is gaslighting in its purest form. This is authoritarian reality distortion, attempting to override people's material experience with propagandistic assertion. Trump tried to force Americans to reject the evidence of their own eyes, as they struggle with high prices and a pervasive sense of economic insecurity, never felt by billionaires like him, and the American people are rejecting this con, which is why his numbers continue to crater. The trajectory here should terrify every Republican operative with even a modicum of strategic thinking, because Trump's intensely loyal base and deeply entrenched partisan views seemingly mask widespread, growing frustration with the administration, and having been elected largely due to anger towards the former Biden administration's handling of the economy, inflation and immigration. Polls show that Trump is now underwater on all of these issues, which means he has squandered his mandate and betrayed the voters who gave him a second chance. Republicans increasingly see it in private and public polls, showing President Trump's persistently plummeting popularity on key issues, and Republicans aren't only losing elections, they're consistently losing support on prices and the economy. In all polls, big or small, Republican or Democrat, over a several-month period, and you cannot spin your way out of this reality. You cannot culture war your way out of people's grocery bills. The comparative analysis is particularly damning, because as of today, 42.8% of Americans approve of the job Trump is doing, and 54% disapprove. According to the Silver Bulletin tracking average, which means Trump is more unpopular than he was at virtually any point in his first term, and he never recovered politically from that unpopularity, which is why he lost in 2020 before staging his comeback, and now he is repeating the same pattern of governance incompetence and policy failure that led to his initial defeat. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, and Trump is governing like it is 2017 all over again, with the same disastrous consequences. And here is where the analysis becomes truly exhilarating for anyone who believes in progressive governance, because over half of all Americans at 53% said they trust the Democratic Party over the Republican Party at 47%, when it comes to handling the rising price of everyday things, with the majority opinion consistent across traditionally Democratic groups, including African Americans at 77%, women at 61%, Latinos at 60%, young people at 59%, and independents at 55%. Read that again because this is monumental. This means Democrats have seized the economic high ground from Republicans on the issue of affordability, which has been the central political battleground of the post-pandemic era. And if Democrats can maintain this advantage, if we can prosecute the case against Republican economic mismanagement, then we are looking at potentially generational gains in 2026 and 2028. The policy failures undergirding these approval numbers are legion and spectacular in their incompetence, because Trump's tariff regime has become a financial and bond market meltdown so catastrophic that the White House was forced to reverse course within days, and his deportation programs are creating labor shortages that drive up costs, while his healthcare sabotage leaves people without coverage, and his tax cuts explode the deficit without delivering any tangible benefits to working families. In 6 short months, President Trump has made Americans poorer, less secure, less healthy, and more isolated while carrying out morally depraved policies and further degrading the rule of law, with the scariest part that he has 41 more months to make this mess even worse. And every day that passes with Americans experiencing this policy disaster is another day that cements the Democratic advantage heading into the next election cycle, but we cannot allow ourselves to become complacent, because most Americans are coming to see that Trump is both depraved and incompetent, and there's a reason why his job approval is sinking, but this must be translated into sustained political organization, voter registration canvassing, phone banking, the unglamorous ground game that wins elections. The polling data shows us that the moment is ripe, that the coalition is fracturing, that independents are fleeing, that even elements of the Republican base are questioning their allegiance, but none of that matters unless we convert this dissatisfaction into Democratic votes in November 2026. The historical parallel that keeps emerging is the 2018 midterm, when Trump's approval ratings were similarly underwater, and his approval rating sat at 41% in the last Marist poll before the 2018 midterm elections, and Republicans lost 40 seats in the House that year, and we are seeing the same pattern emerge now, with Trump's numbers even worse than they were then, and with Democrats energized, and with special elections showing massive Democratic overperformance, and the ingredients are all there for a wave election that could give Democrats unified control of Congress. Democrats' advantage in the generic congressional vote remains steady at 4 points, as the Republican Party is now in danger of losing its long advantage on dealing with the economy, and combined with historical precedent for the party in power losing seats in the midterms, it seems that there is a better than even chance that Republicans lose the House. The MAGA base erosion deserves sustained focus, because this is not just about persuading moderates or energizing Democrats. This is about the core Trump coalition itself beginning to fracture under the weight of broken promises. While 7 in 10 MAGA supporters still say they strongly approve of the president's job performance, fewer Republicans report being part of the MAGA movement compared to earlier this year, with a majority of Republicans reporting identifying with the MAGA movement in April. But in this survey, Republicans are evenly split on whether they identify more as traditional Republicans or as MAGA movement members. And these shifts are notable because Trump has enjoyed tremendous sway over his party in no small part because of his ability to command a core base of support. When the base itself begins to question the cult of personality, when Republicans start distancing themselves from the MAGA brand, that is when the entire project becomes vulnerable to collapse. This is Antonio Gramsci's concept of hegemonic crisis playing out in real time, the moment when the ruling bloc's ideological dominance fractures, when the contradictions become too severe to paper over, when the masses begin to withdraw their consent from the existing order. And we are watching this happen to Trumpism right now in December 2025, as the approval numbers crater, and the coalition in fragments and the policy failures mount. Something shifted in Trump world this month, and his era is already ending with the spell finally starting to wear off, because you can only gaslight people about their economic circumstances for so long before material reality reasserts itself. The path forward requires us to maintain this pressure to continue exposing the failures, to offer a genuine alternative vision of economic populism that actually delivers for working people rather than serving as cover for plutocratic looting. And we must be relentless in connecting Trump's unpopularity to every Republican candidate in every competitive race, because they own this disaster, they voted for these policies, they enabled this presidency, and they must be held accountable. Voters are steadily losing confidence in what the Trump White House is selling, and as 2025 comes to a close, the data is incredibly clear that we are witnessing a political collapse of historic proportions. So when you watch that clip, when you hear the pollster explain that Trump's approval and disapproval have completely flipped since January, understand what you are witnessing, because this is not just another news cycle. This is not just another bad poll. This is the beginning of the end of the MAGA era. This is the moment when the contradictions finally overwhelmed the propaganda, when the reality of policy failure could no longer be denied by even the most committed partisans, and this is our opportunity to build something better, to reconstruct American democracy on foundations of genuine economic justice and political accountability. But only if we seize this moment, only if we organize, only if we fight. The numbers show that America is ready to reject Trumpism, but democratic renewal requires more than polling data. It requires sustained collective action, and the question before us now is whether we have the courage and commitment to finish what these numbers have begun.